Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into a life story that really defies the ordinary. We're talking about Brother Andrew, famously known as God's smuggler.
Yeah, and our source material it gives us this direct window into his experiences. We're drawing from excerpts from the book God's Smuggler, which he wrote with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. It's just packed with personal stories, and you really see the development of his incredible faith.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive is to kind of pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge,
Yeah.
insights from Andrew's journey. We're going to trace his path from, well, a pretty mischievous Dutch boy to a man who built this global mission, exploring the challenges that shaped him, how his faith grew, and ultimately what his life can teach us today. We want this to be clear, relatable, like walking through the story with a friend who's maybe heading off to college, trying to figure things out.
Exactly. We'll really try to focus on understanding not just what he did, but why. The motivations, the spiritual principles behind it all, and that radical trust in God that really defined his mystery.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our story begins in a small, quiet village in Holland, a place called Wit.
Right. It's built on that polder land, that incredible land reclaimed from the sea. It's set along a dike, basically one main street with houses kind of perched on little mounds.
Tiny bridges over canals connecting them.
Yeah, exactly. And at either end, on the highest points, you had the two churches.
So even as a kid, Andrew was full of this energy, dreaming of adventure. He called it daring do, spies, being a lone scout, but with no real enemies around. He and the other boys, they just turned on each other sometimes, like literally with their wooden shoes, the klompen.
He tells that story about breaking one right over his friend Keys's head. Yeah. And his father, a blacksmith, had to work late, patiently wiring the shoe back together. It gives you such a snapshot of that life, doesn't it? 6 kids, hardworking dad, his mother, Mama, whose soup pot was always ready.
And then there was his older brother, Bass.
Bass. Yeah, he couldn't speak or really care for himself physically, but he had this extraordinary, almost mystical talent for the pump organ.
Just played perfectly.
Perfectly captivated the whole village, just a really unique thread in their family.
But Andrew definitely had that rebellious streak. He tells this great story about putting a pane of glass on his neighbor, Mrs. Wetstra's chimney.
Right, to make her stove smoke up the house.
He wanted to see if he could finally crack those perpetual smiles they always wore.
And he got away with it. Found a guilder nearby, too, which was a huge amount for a kid back then. Pretended he found it at school.
But here's where it gets interesting, like you said earlier. The next day, Mr. Wetstra sees him.
And he knew. He knew exactly what Andrew had done.
But instead of being angry,
He gives him a cookie and suggests he pray about it.
and Andrew's reaction is just complete dismissal. Like, what good would that do? God never listened.
Yeah. It shows you so much about him early on. Restless, mischievous, definitely looking for excitement, but also, deeply skeptical about faith or prayer, even as a boy.
And that skepticism probably only got deeper with what came next. May 10th, 1940, his 12th birthday.
Planes overhead, bombs falling. The war arrived. Changed everything.
Wit got flooded with refugees because the Dutch government deliberately flooded the land to slow down the Germans.
Right. Their small house was suddenly packed. Mama's soup pot never stopped. And Andrew, well, he started living out those adventure fantasies, but now it was dangerous.
Sneaking out at night. His mother knew, apparently, but didn't stop him.
Putting sugar in a German lieutenant's gas tank. The whole village thought that was hilarious.
Or getting caught with firecrackers, but managing to hide them in his hand while a soldier searched his coat. Small acts, maybe, but they show this developing boldness, right?
Right.
A willingness to take risks.
Definitely. But the war escalated quickly. Hostages were shot, houses burned. The jokes weren't funny anymore.
Hiding became survival. For many men, the onderdukers, the divers under, like his brother Ben.
Yeah. They hid the radio to listen to the BBC, squeezed people into these tiny crawl spaces.
Then came the razzia. These sudden raids, German trucks sealing off the village, searching for men to force into labor.
And Andrew, just a boy still, had to run with the others, sprinting to the polders, leaping canals, hiding in swamps.
Even diving into a broad canal to get past the railway dike. Everyone had to run young Cornelius, his deaf father.
That period must have instilled such a deep understanding of repression, risk, the desperate need for freedom, for safety.
Finally, spring 1945. Liberation. Germans left, Canadians arrived.
And Andrew's first thought wasn't joining the celebration.
No, it was to run 5 miles to the Canadian camp to beg for bread crusts.
And his mother's reaction when he brought them back, weeping with gratefulness, calling it the bread of life. It's such a powerful moment. It symbolizes the end of starvation, sure, but maybe also a glimpse of something deeper, even if Andrew didn't quite grasp it then.
So the war ends, but that longing for adventure is still there. He joins the military, heads off to the East Indies. But before he leaves, he bumps into Mr. Wetstra again.
The neighbor from the chimney prank.
Yep. Mr. Wetstra sees the uniform and says, "I will pray for you, Andrew. I will pray that the adventure you find will satisfy."
And Andrew is just completely puzzled by that word, satisfy. Adventure, danger, excitement, yes, but satisfaction, fulfillment, that wasn't what he was looking for.
He certainly found adventure in Indonesia, but it wasn't satisfying, was it?
Not at all. He plunged into this life of reckless bravado, drinking, fighting, smashing windows. His motto became, get smart, lose your mind.
Wearing a bright yellow hat into combat, daring them to shoot him.
Yeah. That intensity, that sort of seeking oblivion, it really speaks to a deeper turmoil, doesn't it? He was writing to pen pals, looking for answers. One, Thelol, wrote about guilt, which he felt completely chained by. But then she wrote about forgiveness, and he just couldn't get his head around it. He felt trapped by his actions, by his inner state.
There's that particularly striking moment with the monkey, the one gifted to him.
Oh, yeah. Killed brutally by another soldier, Jonswort. Andrew had this unique bond with the monkey. It only trusted him. And Andrew's reaction wasn't anger, not retaliation.
Just stunned, overwhelmed by it all.
Exactly. Stupefaction, he calls it. Feeling overwhelmed by the blows of life. Soon after that, he gets the delayed news of his mother's death.
Runs off alone to cry. Feeling completely alone in the world. It's like the accumulation of war, loss, reckless living, this deep guilt.
Oh.
It was crushing him.
Then his time in combat ends abruptly. Bullet through the ankle.
Just falls, sees the holes in his boot, the blood. Takes him out of the fighting, but leaves him physically wounded and, probably deeply unsettled inside.
From the hospital, he writes this brutally honest letter to Theo. Confesses everything.
The cursing, the drinking, the crude jokes, being hardened to death, no desire for God, feeling like a stranger to the person she thought he was.
Yeah. But the hospital also brought these unexpected encounters, the Franciscan nuns who cared for him.
He talks about falling in love with their quiet, tireless service, their genuine cheerfulness, no complaints, even when they were run off their feet.
And one nun, Sister Patrice, tells him that story about catching monkeys.
Right, they grab bait in a jar but won't let go, so they get trapped.
A simple image maybe, but perhaps it really resonated with his feeling of being trapped by guilt, by sin,
So he returns to Wit, wounded. Ankles painful, struggles with simple things like climbing a ladder. His old room feels different, damp, clammy, like it reflects his inner state.
Rehab involves working with clay, which he apparently hated.
Yeah. But he starts reconnecting with people who represent a different path. Phil, he admits his spiritual life is stalled, and he meets that pretty girl, Greet, at the rehab center.
Then comes this local revival meeting. He goes with other boys, full of their usual disruptive antics, laughing when the preacher calls them out.
But when the preacher invites people forward, Andrew and Keys go up, almost compelled, kneeling for prayer. And Andrew's first thought is pure embarrassment.
Right, what would Phil think? Him going down the sawdust trail.
But the preacher wasn't done. He gives Andrew and Keys their first assignment. Go back to Wit and hold a meeting.
That moment feels crucial. It's this unexpected response to a challenge, isn't it? A tentative step onto a path he hadn't planned at all.
And this is the beginning, really. His early steps of faith. He becomes this voracious seeker, biking from church to church, studying, listening.
Deliberately avoiding his old drinking buddies. Spending time with people serious about faith keys, Miss Meikle, the Wetstras, still discussing everything he's reading.
And Gretchen, the girl from rehab, comes to visit. She shares her own struggles, wondering if God could forgive her past, if she could start all over again.
She describes this pretty funny prayer, crying all night, but waking up feeling completely new. These shared experiences, this community forming around him as he explored faith, it seems really important.
He also makes this significant sacrifice. He has what he calls an enlightened moment, realizing how much he's spending on cigarettes.
So he just stops smoking specifically to buy books.
German grammar, English grammar, church history, Bible commentary. These were the first books in his family home, beyond the Bible, and hymn book.
Wow.
He spends 2 years just reading, every spare moment. This wasn't just studying, was it?
Yeah.
It was a radical shift in priorities. shows this deep, newfound hunger to understand his faith. It demonstrates that, those early stages of conversion, it often involve tangible changes, a passionate pursuit of knowledge.
That hunger, that really fueled his search for a specific calling. He looked into theology, but a 12-year seminary program that felt way too slow.
Started correspondence courses, but got frustrated with the delays.
Right. He shares this frustration with a Sidney Wilson, who tells him about WEC, the Worldwide Evangelization Crusade.
An English missionary group known for training missionaries who didn't wait for formal programs.
Exactly. And Wilson also introduced this concept of praying through basically persistent prayer until you feel you have an answer from God.
Interestingly, Keyes, his friend who was studying for ordination, finds the WEC approach theologically very sound. He quotes Jesus telling disciples to carry neither purse, nor script, nor shoes.
Yeah, that radical dependence on God. So Andrew meets a Mr. Johnson from WEC, and that meeting clearly sets the trajectory for, well, everything that followed.
He describes this pivotal moment, praying alone out on the polders, asking God basically, is this missionary thing really you, or just my old daring-do dream?
He prayed for hours, he says.
And he felt an answer come really clearly to his mind. Isaiah 54, verse 1. The children of the desolate are more than the children of the married.
He took that to mean a call to have many spiritual children, which might mean not having his own physical family.
Which was a profound challenge, because he really wanted a wife, kids. He even asked again, randomly opened his Bible.
And his finger lands on Isaiah 54.1 again.
Wow.
Yeah. Chastened, he said, but the message was clear, even if he didn't like it. He felt desolate. When he got back home, his room even felt damp and clammy again, sort of reflecting that internal struggle with this direction.
But despite that personal cost, the call to step out was undeniable. 1952, he leaves for London, calls it the first leg of a journey that is still going on.
London must have been a massive culture shock. Red buses, black taxis on the wrong side, asking for directions and understanding nothing.
Ends up taking a taxi, spending money he barely had.
Right. At WEC headquarters, he struggles to communicate until William Hopkins, Uncle Hoppy, is brought in. Uncle Hoppy sounds like this really practical man, large hands, the kind of person people went to for help.
And the painting job Andrew came for was already done. So the bed he expected wasn't available.
But Uncle Hoppy offers him working papers, invites him to stay with his family. They ran a storefront mission.
And Mrs. Hopkins, Mother Hoppy, she embodied that radical faith, didn't she? Her simple phrase, God will supply.
And Andrew witnessed it firsthand. Unexpected casseroles arriving, old debts being paid, donations showing up exactly when needed.
He became part of their family, doing chores like cooking, ironing things that apparently thunderstruck the Hopkinses, who asked him to stay permanently. That experience, living in a home where needs were met through simple faith, seems absolutely foundational.
Definitely. Uncle Hoppy even demonstrated their outreach right in front of him, preaching to a streetwalker they met who converted that very night. This family showed Andrew a faith that was active, dependent, deeply embedded in community.
So September 1953, he moves to Glasgow for the WEC Missionary Training School.
School fees were £30 per session. He had the first one, and he says he actually looked forward to seeing how God would provide the rest. It was his first conscious exercise in trusting God for the material needs of life.
He watched other students pray for needs, maybe get partial answers like needing 10 blankets and getting 6, made him question things.
Yeah, is this how God works? Is God just a principle or a living leader? This led him to a critical realization.
What was that?
That the security wasn't in the money itself, but in the relationship with God. He needed to know God as a living leader, not just a set of principles. If it was just principles, he felt he'd rather go back to the chocolate factory.
That's powerful. Radical faith isn't just expecting stuff. It's knowing who is providing.
Exactly. The training included these evangelism trips. Student teams got just £1 a note each, expected to cover all expenses, push them into dependence.
And they had 2 strict rules. Never mention a need aloud to others.
And give away a tithe, 10% of whatever came in, immediately, within 24 hours.
He contrasts their experience with another team that held onto their tithes for emergencies.
That team ended up in debt. Andrew's team, despite daily emergencies, finished ahead, even had money to send overseas. He concluded, fast as we could give money away, God was always swifter. That practical exercise just hammered home the principle. Generosity and trust unlock provision.
He remembers specific examples too, right? Like needing a cake for a 4 p.m. tea party.
And one arrives unexpectedly by postman at 3:45 p.m.
And that story of finding a shilling coin on the path Just as a hungry student asks him for money, he describes the internal battle: keep it, give it away, and trust God again.
Yeah. The source doesn't spell out the exact outcome of that shilling moment, but the point is the internal conflict and the lesson from the whole exercise. Silent trust, radical generosity led to God's provision.
These experiences really formed the bedrock of his trust. After Glasgow, he's back in Holland, sees a magazine about the Warsaw Youth Festival, July 1955.
Invitation open to everyone. Images of marching youth fascinated him. He felt drawn to it.
Only told Uncle Hoppy, who immediately sent £50 for the trip. Shows that network of faith and trust he was building.
On his last day at the chocolate factory, he spoke with a communist colleague, tried to share his faith.
She gave the standard lines: God is the invention of the exploiter class, that sort of thing.
But then, quietly, she added something like, after all, if you could choose, who wouldn't choose? Well, God and all that. He thought he saw tears, a moment of unexpected vulnerability behind the ideology.
So, the trip to Warsaw, July 55.
Yeah.
Eye-opening. He finds a Baptist service and, because he's a foreigner, gets invited to speak from the platform, astonished by that freedom.
But then later, watching the Parade of Triumph, thousands of young socialists marching, singing with such conviction, he saw the mammoth counterfact to the small Christian presence, saw the immense strength and belief in the regime.
He went to Czechoslovakia, too. Guy talks about religious freedom, shows him an interchurch center, a manuscript for a new Bible translation.
But Andrew felt it was mostly for show, not real distribution. He met a pastor who risked taking him home.
And revealed the reality. Government control over everything. Licenses, sermons, everything.
Leaving Czechoslovakia was dramatic, too. Missed his group, gets driven back in a black limousine. He found it darkly humorous, even though the tour director was furious, had even called the morgue.
So these early trips, they weren't about smuggling Bibles yet.
Not yet. More about seeing conditions, meeting Christians under pressure, understanding the needs behind the Iron Curtain.
Back home, he gets contacted by this prayer group, Gracht van Omhoog Power from above.
Their letter said the Holy Spirit told them to contact him. Immediately intrigued him.
Meets their leader, Karl de Graaf. Experiences listening prayer, praying, and feeling they receive specific info they wouldn't otherwise know.
Like knowing specific prayer needs of others, things like that. This idea of being led by the Spirit became absolutely central for him.
Like the driving lesson story.
Yeah. Mr. de Graaf teaches him to drive. Andrew passes the test first time, doesn't even own a car. And de Graaf says, that's the excitement and obedience, finding out later what God had in mind. Reinforce that idea. God might ask you to do something without showing you the full picture right away.
All this leads him towards Yugoslavia, 1957. The dream grows. He applies for a visa, puts missionary as his occupation. Suspects that caused problems.
Around this time, his father dies. The funeral, casket on Mama's grave. House felt truly empty.
He's in West Berlin when a telegram arrives. Yugoslav visa denied. Confusing, because he felt he'd had this sense it would be granted.
So he goes to the consulate in Berlin, applies again, writes missionary.
And this time, he gets it. Crossing the border, suitcase full of tracts. The guard asks if he has anything to declare. Andrew feels prompted to say.
Only small things.
And the guard waves him through. No check. He saw it as God's hand, even in that small step.
First goal, find Jamil in Zagreb. Contact from the Dutch Bible Society. Hadn't heard from him since '45. Andrew sent a letter ahead.
And incredibly, after a long search, it reaches Jamil on the very day Andrew entered the country.
Jamil was astonished. A young man, Nikola, becomes his interpreter, friend, taking risks to help him.
Travels through Yugoslavia, cities, remote villages, sees the great need. In Nosaki village, the church is just one member, the widow Anna. Uses her home as a prayer house. Local parties saw it as harmless.
Then the encounter with Palouse in Nosaki, asking about his car. Andrew tells them it's the car that you pray for each morning.
And the mechanic looks the engine, declares it mechanically impossible for this engine to run in its state. Becomes a believer right there, tells Andrew it hurt him to see him abuse a miracle, and cleans the engine.
Wow, a literal answer to prayer about the car. Amazing.
But the mission's specific focus, that solidifies in Belgrade. He speaks at a church, expects educated people, asks who owns a Bible.
Only 7 hands go up? He was shocked. He'd already given away the few Bibles he brought.
Works out a sharing system for the few they had, but that night, a powerful resolve is born.
Yeah, he promised God he would bring Bibles, thousands of them, to churches behind the Iron Curtain, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, every other country God opened. Didn't know how, but the mission was clear. Get Bibles to people who desperately needed them. This was the moment, wasn't it? God's smuggler was truly born. The goal: enable believers to access God's word.
And it was back in Osaka, Yugoslavia, April 57, that he specifically prayed for a wife.
And again, the answer comes with that striking certainty. Isaiah 54:1, the children of the desolate.
Asked again, opened the Bible randomly, landed on the same verse. The message about spiritual children was consistent, now tied to his mission to reach those behind the wall.
He understood God's focus for his work, but yeah, he still deeply desired a family, wrestled with that tension.
Returns home to Holland. His room feels dark, unwelcoming after the vibrancy, the risk he just experienced. But then he visits Mr. Van Dam.
And meets Corey, whose hair seemed to turn to gold in the light, he says.
He struggles with proposing, lists all the difficulties. Constant travel, no address, no income, room over a shed, the danger. Thinks Corey was just too smart.
His proposal was incredibly erect, wasn't it? Corey, I want you to marry me, but don't say no until I tell you how hard it will be. You'd be crazy to, Corey, but I do so want you to.
Asks her to decide while he makes his next trip to Hungary.
That Hungary trip itself had a powerful moment. At the border, stopped by soldiers inspecting his car.
He deliberately bows his head and says this long, hearty Thanksgiving prayer for his food. A clear act of faith right there.
And incredibly, while he prayed, the soldiers were just silent. As soon as he finished, slammed the car door, raced back to their boat. He saw signs of the recent revolt in Budapest, met a pastor forced to paint lampshades, faced interrogation himself.
Then he returns to Corey, her answer.
So simple, so practical. She worried and prayed for him anyway, so had time I better be a worried wife than just a cranky friend. Just a beautiful, clear acceptance of the risks, choosing to share his life and mission.
They marry. That dark room over the shed becomes home. Corey's sunshine and warmth, he calls it. Lack of kitchen, plumbing didn't matter. Her presence transformed it. Shows home is about relationship, not comfort.
Then the unexpected side effect of him speaking about needs behind the curtain.
Massive clothing donations. 8 tons in the first year. Storage nightmare. Bales piled high. Constant battle with fleas.
Shows the generosity of supporters, yeah, but also the practical challenges. And the personal cost, too, missing his son Joppy's milestones. Tempted by stable job offers, but felt called to continue.
The mission grew. He needed more team members. People offered, drawn by the excitement, some maybe a bit naively. I'd like to come just to carry your suitcases.
But Andrew knew the reality. It required absolute faith, not just adventure seeking. He didn't have a secret trick for safety. It was total dependence on God every single day. He couldn't take that faith step for someone else.
His standard reply became, well, if I meet you behind the Iron Curtain, then by all means, let's talk some more.
Most never followed up. He and Corey prayed specifically for the right person. The name Hans Gruber came to mind, this giant, awkward Dutchman he'd met.
Hans joins. Andrew described the challenge of teaching Hans to drive took way longer than expected.
They set off on their first trip, Hans driving without a license, though apparently that was legal for a learner there.
Close call in Poland. Hans hits another car. The Pole wants the police. Andrew's wallet happens to be full of zloty. Maybe God's provision, even in a prior mistake of over-exchanging.
Offers money instead of police. Keeps upping it. Finally holds out 10,000 zloty, calls it a fair amount. The Pole takes it, yells no police, and leaves. Andrew thanks God for using a mistake to get them out of another potential disaster.
In 1961, they cross into Russia with Hans. Hans is excited, speaks Russian to the guards, who are flattered. They might have been among the first cars without an official tourist guide.
Moscow. Vast. They find a packed Thursday night prayer meeting, 1,200 people.
Wow.
To find contacts to deliver Bibles, Andrew just milled in the crowd, asking God for that simple moment of recognition between believers who'd never met.
And he meets Markov, takes the Bibles, promises delivery all over Russia by the next week. Mission accomplished for that trip. Shows the power of that Christian connection across barriers.
But it was delivering the last Bibles in Ukraine that the next phase became clear. Someone shows them this tiny, pocket-sized Ukrainian Bible.
And Andrew realizes the need isn't just hundreds, it's thousands of these compact Bibles in Slavic languages for Russia.
Another team member, Rolf, suggests they print them themselves. The bid comes back. $15,000 for 5,000 Bibles.
Andrew was paralyzed by the sum. He'd learned to trust God for, like, toothpaste. But $15,000, impossible. Bank account nearly empty.
Rolf and Hans saw it as a little matter. It just shows, doesn't it? Faith grows, but trusting God for bigger, seemingly insurmountable needs requires a whole new level of reliance, even after years of seeing provision. It's not a one-time lesson.
Adventures continued. 1964, Andrew and Rolf take this huge cargo of Bibles into Russia. Value 650 cows, he calculated, an economic crime punishable by execution if caught.
Andrew prayed all night with Corey beforehand. His advice to Rolf was crucial. Depend on the spirit, not cleverness or cunning. They were stopped by police for a minor traffic violation, but the story cuts off there in the source we have.
Okay, East Germany. He meets Henrietta, a teacher pressured over the state ritual, Jugendweihe, instead of Christian confirmation. Nightly visits from party officials trying to intimidate her.
He also met Wilhelm, a youth worker, and his wife Mar Wilhelm shared this vital insight. Overt persecution can strengthen faith, but the state's indirect attack, luring youth away before their faith is rooted, that's more dangerous. Churches were retreating.
Wilhelm felt they needed to remember, with God on our side we shall conquer, and that their local situation wasn't the whole story. He saw Andrew's presence as a reminder of that bigger picture.
Andrew took a trip to Yugoslavia with Corey after she'd been ill. The border guards saw them together, assumed they were newlyweds, were less suspicious. A practical insight Andrew stored away.
They delivered Bibles, joyful churches, but day 7, police arrived where they're staying. They had to flee to Bulgaria and Romania. Corey worried about capture.
Bulgaria was unexpectedly easy. Pleasant border crossing, friendly people. Car got stuck near a pub. Villagers happily helped pull it out, curious about the car but not the cargo.
In Sofia, he found his contact, Petrov, through what he called a common miracle of just recognizing each other's spirits. Met Abraham, 75, tirelessly finding and sharing Bibles, living in a goatskin tent but full of contentment.
Romania was different, a 4-hour border search. The regime's tactic there was consolidation, merging churches, confiscating buildings, hard on peasants who had to travel miles.
Yet he saw this huge, vibrant Sunday service, passionate singing, simultaneous prayer. Faith was alive despite the pressure.
Met a hostile church secretary denying any need for Bibles, but then saw other believers finding ways to buy Bibles on the black market or showing incredible perseverance, like a farm family in Transylvania or a gypsy church fighting confiscation. It showed the varied impact, didn't it? Resilience, weariness, even collaboration sometimes.
Throughout the book, there are these amazing stories of miracle provision, too, like Wim, the farmer.
Yeah. Sold his family house for half price, specifically so the money could be used for God's work. Andrew agreed to buy it for 10,000 guilders, having absolute no money at the time. Pure faith.
And unexpected healing. A plane crash he was in somehow resolved his decades-old back problems.
Incredible. Another powerful lesson was forgiveness. He describes confronting informers who reported on him.
Telling them he knew and that he forgave them.
Right. The forgiveness wasn't necessarily received, but Andrew learned his obligation was simply to forgive. And his own heart felt lighter. That's a really tough, practical outworking of faith.
The work grew to astonishing scales, culminating in Project Turtle, 1981.
Using a barge, the Gabriella, a tug, the Michael, smuggling 232 tons of Bibles.
Floated waterproof packages to a beach where thousands of believers were waiting. Army seized the rest, threw them in the sea, but the majority were saved. Just shows the sheer scale of need and the boldness required.
The ministry expanded by incorporating part-timers. Became more like an organism, he said, not a rigid organization. Allowed for intimacy, caring, spawning new, smaller groups where members prayed for each other by name. Focus on nurturing many self-sustaining groups.
And then that fascinating development. Ministry from within. Christians behind the Iron Curtain, like Wilhelm's team in East Germany, started traveling into other Eastern Bloc countries themselves.
Often easier for them to move around than Westerners. Churches that received Bibles were strengthened, started reaching out themselves. A church in Czechoslovakia even started sending missionaries globally.
As travel eased up over time, Andrew encouraged Western tourists to become 1,000 ambassadors of God.
Just visiting churches, saying those 6 healing words, greetings from your brothers and sisters, from their home country, simple presence, connection.
Andrew's core principle, it always seemed to be, not against any political ideology, but wholeheartedly for Jesus. Maintained a simple lifestyle, basic needs, never letting greed corrupt the mission.
He often came back to that phrase, to be there. He recounts that pastor in Warsaw telling him, young man, your just being here is worth more than any words.
And that simple comment transformed his understanding. It wasn't just the Bibles. It was the presence. Showing suffering Christians they weren't forgotten. Being a representative of Christ's body. The call was simply to be there.
And that principle guided his later work too, especially among Muslims, emphasizing getting into countries by serving, healthcare, education, technology, being there, evangelism, serving the least of these, showing Christ's love through presence and action. Even in Western cities, presence evangelism in your own neighborhood. His focus was always the long picture, listening to God while his team handled the day-to-day.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. What an extraordinary journey
Right.
from that, daring Dutch kid with the wooden shoes and the chimney pranks
Mhm.
to a man who risked absolutely everything, completely dependent on God for every single need to get Bibles and support to believers isolated by political systems.
His life is just such a powerful, practical example of radical trust in God's provision, God's guidance, whether it was for, a shilling coin or $15,000 for printing or safe passage across heavily guarded borders. He faced danger, saw incredible miracles, built a family, a global team, all while staying focused on being for Jesus.
Yeah, the source material just repeatedly shows his faith wasn't theoretical. It was lived out daily, informed by listening prayer, this fierce commitment to obedience, even when it didn't make logical sense or felt, personally costly. He understood his purpose was strengthening the church, the body of Christ, wherever it was suffering, providing access to God's word, the encouragement of connection.
And his message for us today, whether you're getting ready for college, starting a career, just navigating daily life, it feels really profound. The call is simply to be there. Not everyone's called to smuggle Bibles, obviously,
Right.
but everyone is called to be present, serving others, showing up, being a representative of Jesus right where you are in your own unique circumstances.
It definitely challenges us to think beyond maybe grand gestures and consider the simple, powerful act of just being present in faith, serving others in our own communities, schools, workplaces.
So here's where it gets really interesting, maybe for you listening. If Andrew learned that just being there was worth more than words, what does being there look like for you, specifically, starting today, in your own corner of the world? That's definitely something to mull over.